Well, it's a big good evening from us coming out from Coventry City.
My time, I paid for my crime. I already did my time, I paid for my crime.
Got a big show coming up for you tonight.
I already did my time, I paid for my crime.
From London town, we got Matthew Williams.
I already did my time, I paid for my crime.
From the United States of America, we got Dr. David Remay.
For my crime. Back in the day, I didn't really care about the system. It was all about survival. It was do or die. I had too many rivals. I was too young and foolish to stay in school. I learned my lessons in the streets. There was not a man I couldn't beat. I was good with my hands and very quick on my feet. I was swimming in women. I had girls all over the street. I was getting money. Life was so sweet. Now things have changed. The whole game has been.
Guys, I'll be with you in a second. Stay live.
Man, don't need no gun in my hand. It ain't about being no gangster. Life is too short to spend it all in jail. Trying to cope with this living hell. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time.
All right, we're just going to get right to the matter. Tonight we have a big show coming out of Issues Today right here in on World Jam Global Radio. We've got live with us our guest from the United States of America. First and foremost, let me introduce to you Dr. David Remay.
Hello, how are you doing?
Could be a lot better, but let's carry on.
Kervin, I'm glad to have you, and I'm very happy to have you. We followed each other on the Twitter for about a year and a half, and I'm so happy to have you speak about the matters of the Middle East. Before we get going, I usually give, and will again today, an update on politics in the United States of America. This last week, we had a major debate on CNBC, which is the business program of NBC Broadcasting, and the 10 Republicans were up there, and the main result of that debate is they left complaining and crying because they didn't get the questions they wanted. They wanted softballs, and they got questions. For example, Ted Cruz was asked, will you vote tomorrow on the budget deal or not? And he spent 2 minutes attacking the press, and then when he wanted to answer on someone else's time, he was denied the opportunity to do so, and he blamed the questionnaires for this. It's absolutely amateurish, pedantic, rude, and expected from those uncivilized trollops. Now, Jeb Bush is sinking further in the polls. He's now under 5% after having $100 million of PAC money because Marco Rubio in the debate spanked him quite good. And Marco Rubio's lies haven't caught up with him about spending money illegally from the state of Florida, rejecting the vote of the Democratic candidate Gore, and going on about other matters. The Cuban-Canadian Texan continues in his hate against the immigrants coming to America.
Carry on, guys.
The Cuban-Canadian Texan, Ted Cruz. Fiorina. Hello? Hello?
Hello, we're here.
Okay, are we on? That was a strange commercial. What was that for, aspirin? Chris in troubled waters, typical of a man who has troubled waters in New Jersey and involved in his scandals. And Ben Carson, the only African-American candidate on the Republican side who doesn't understand Article 6, Section 3 of the United States Constitution, which says there shall never be a religious test for any political official in the United States, must not be the president or have any other significant office in this country, wants to abolish Medicare, which is the health program for the elderly in the United States, and he wants to end farm subsidies, including those for corn, which the ethanol producers are reliant upon. Now, I don't know how that's going to play in Iowa. And Trump continues to soar in the polls. He's now at the height, nearly 28% of those 12 Republicans, and he continues to be the Republicans' largest nightmare. Meanwhile, Hillary is acing it. She did well in the debates. In her appearance before the United States Congress, before the
Are you there, David?
Hello?
Are we there? Are we back on?
Yeah.
Yes, I think the Mossad just sent a wire through.
Okay, we're back on. Carry on, David.
Now, let me continue. This past week, the IAEA voted down a proposal that Israel signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1970 and open its Dimona plant up to nuclear inspections. The United States and Europe carried Israel's water in this important matter and voted it down in a close vote of about 56 to 43. Finally, I want to say the murders in Israel under the cloak of stabbing excuses continue to liquidate Palestinian lives, and the result is non-judicial I'm in Connecticut. There's nothing I can do. I'm in the United States. How is the weather over there?
The weather's okay. It's been raining a lot recently, but we're having a Halloween party later, so I'm quite excited about that. I've had my notes prepared. It's nice being over here, but I don't know.
What are you going to be?
I'm doing a lot of.
Bear with me.
Kevin.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right, I'm just gonna have to reboot this again.
Kevin.
Yes, mate.
Would you like to do this another day?
I think it will be best because it seems you have a lot of distractions, so it's best you deal with them and then just have a completely clear schedule so we can do it properly, I find.
Right.
If that's best for you, but I really, really want to discuss this. But we can do it tomorrow, or we can move it to next week.
Yeah.
I've got the connection with you guys now, so it'll be much easier to do it.
The thing is, she's now gone out. So we're going to be free to go. It's
Yeah.
it's going to be up to you guys if you guys want to carry on, because I'm ready to carry on.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just waiting for the internet to reconnect.
I just want to ask: did what she say go out on the air? I mean, those were that pre.
No, what it is she's just switched off the. She's having a menstrual moment.
Well, in that case, I think we should probably try it another time. It'll be easier.
She's now gone out. She's gone out. She turned off all the electric. She turned off the router. She turned off the internet. Turned off all the lights and went out, which had me having to come out of here and go and find how to put everything back on again. But we are now back live again. And yeah, this is actually going out live. My gosh. Let's get on with the show, shall we, guys?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Where did we leave off? Let me just say this. The last thing, and this relates to our general point of view. The FBI Director Comey this week accused Black Lives Matter and other African American groups and those of us who protest police brutality in the United States of having video coverage that is intimidating police and causing them not to enforce laws against crime in the United States, even though we're at the lowest level of crime since George W. Bush's regime as president. Comey says, quote, police are frightened to do their jobs because they may be recorded. Well, if that's the truth, then time is for us to get a new FBI director, in my opinion, because recording the police and ensuring that they're doing their job properly is absolutely essential, as was proven in this case when the sheriff in South Carolina came out and said that the recording in the classroom by other students of a policeman who was then fired 2 days later for throwing an African-American student across the room in her chair, endangering her lives, was the sole basis upon which the policeman was fired. Had the police recording not occurred, had the recording by the students not occurred, they would not have had the evidence to get rid of the policeman. So that's where we are here, and I wish we had cameras in Israel to film everything that's happening there against the Palestinians and against the Israelis so that we would have a better picture of truth. That's where we are, and I think Matt was going to introduce himself now, and we're happy to have this wonderful guest from King's College and London, Matt Williams. Go ahead, Matt.
Hello, guys. My name's Matthew Williams. I recently completed a graduate in conflict security and development at King's College London, doing a bit of job hunting at the moment and a bit of freelance journalism. So I'm happy, very, very happy to be here on Global Jam and Issues Today. And I'm looking forward to discussing the important matters dominating the contemporary Middle East.
Thank you very much for that. Well, listen, guys, sorry for the interruption, sorry for the distractions, and sorry for the disconnection. We are now back and we are live, and we're going to run with this. Now, this is a very delicate and important issue that really needs to be discussed, and a lot of people seem to want to sit on the fence when it comes to this issue of the Middle East conflict. But we wanted to start off by asking the main question that if a world peace is so dependent on the conflict between the Middle East being resolved, then why is it that everybody is not doing everything within their power to make this happen, and who, where, and what is standing in its way? And I'd like to start off with you, Matthew, as you've sort of like mastered in this. Why isn't everybody doing their utmost best to resolve peace in the Middle East?
With the Middle East, I'd say the developments currently underway. We live in revolutionary times. The revolutionary changes occurring in the Middle East are extraordinary. Historical developments and a modern creation that has produced a crisscrossing and almost illogical outcome for anyone who's looking in at the Middle Eastern conflict. And to some extent, it is understandable why these new conflicts have cast a shadow and sideline developments in the occupied territories on what's currently happening in the occupied territories at the moment between the Israelis and the Palestinians. We've seen enormous upheaval. The Arab Spring occurred, and it set off a chain reaction, and what you see is incredible changes occurring across the Middle East that include, the old colonial states, everything that's been drawn on the map by the Western powers, they're falling to pieces. And what we're seeing is a redefinition of what constitutes the Middle East nowadays, I find.
So let's follow up. I think that one of the things you just said, the occupied territories, relates directly to what Kervin was asking you. And that is, why aren't we doing all we can to resolve the peace between Palestine and Israel? For example, if you said the word occupied territory on the American news broadcast, any of them, you would be called anti-Semitic in 2 seconds and taken off the air, and your job threatened. You can't use those kind of words when it comes to Israel. Occupied territory. You have to say the territory in which Israel is trying to stop Palestinians from murdering every Jew in the world. Things like that. So I think that the vocabulary itself, the permission to say certain words to get to the truth of a matter, have been suspended empirically and in time and space to prevent us from getting to a solution. What do you say to that kind of view, or what do you think is preventing people from really seeking a solution as they did, for example, with Iran? Why isn't there a power force, 5 nations plus one? Why don't we have a group of people sitting down and saying, Israel, this is what you're going to do. Palestine, this is what you're going to do. And if you don't do it, you're going to be sanctioned, as was Iran or North Korea. Why isn't that happening, Matthew?
Well, what I say is, as we've said, we have the Syrian civil war, we have the Iraqi civil war, we have the Yemeni civil war, including an intervention by Saudi Arabia. We have chaos in the Sinai. We saw the terrible tragedy that occurred today with the shoot. Well, we don't know what happened to that flight, but it was brought down over the Sinai, which is an area of conflict. We see Libya being torn to shreds by civil war. I mean, it would be very easy to say, how we can be so easily distracted by what's happening in Israel. And what Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, for all who's listening who don't know, Netanyahu is trying to isolate Israel from the regional socio-political shifts that are occurring. However, Israel has not been immune to those changes occurring across the Middle East. We have, we see what people are calling happening across the Middle East as the Islamic winter. They're calling it the Arabian winter as opposed to the Arab Spring now. But what we have we have the Arab Spring withering across the Middle East, as Adam Labor would say, but it's blooming in Israel, where we have the Joint List, a coalition of Islamists, Arab nationalists, and progressive activists, being the third largest bloc in the Knesset. The Israeli parliament, Arab activists are using the Jewish state's robust democracy and independent institutions to push their agenda of radical but peaceful political change forward. And I think the Likud party, the Israeli right, is they've got this bunker mentality where they're trying to isolate themselves from regional change. But what we're seeing now is an unraveling of that status quo. And the Netanyahu and his very loose coalition government are trying to keep that in place. But you can't stay immune to the outside. I mean, nothing stays the same forever in anything. You look at empires, you look at occupations, they change in themselves. You have regimes, they can't stay the same forever because they have to adapt to their regional surroundings. And you have to, I believe, what they failed to do, particularly Netanyahu's government, they failed to reach out and take an opportunity to really affect change across the Middle East in a progressive way and end their dispute with the Palestinians. But the Palestinians obviously have become completely isolated in the international community because it's not a big issue anymore, because you've seen what's happening across the Middle East. No one sees that as the big issue anymore, and including Arab regimes. Arab regimes usually use the Palestinian conflict as, a piece of propaganda, or sometimes they see it as an important issue, but they use it to bolster up their own, credibility. But unfortunately now they have counter-revolutions, they have revolutions, they have ISIS, they have rebels trying to effect regime change. So they have to focus on those problems instead of the Palestinian problem. So that's why it's not such a big issue anymore in America until recently. And what we're seeing now, as I repeated before, is that unraveling of, the status quo. It can't stay in place anymore. And yeah, That's my view. Apologies if I went on there, but it's important.
Yeah, yes, but we're looking at what? I mean, out of 150 members, you're looking at how many? 16 or 17 are non-Jewish. I mean, how can 16 or 17 people change the laws of Israel? And if they're attempting to do that, show me in one instance where they've succeeded. In fact, the laws of the last year, in fact, the last 3 or 4 months have become far more repressive. In fact, even yesterday morning in Hebron, new borders were put up that prohibit people from going in and out of Hebron unless they live there and prove they live there, not to mention the grotesque wall that has gone up dividing Israelis from Palestinians and Palestinians from their own land. It seems to me that the reason, in part, that the world is not confronting this is because to do so is to pay a high political price in their own countries for doing so. I don't think it has anything to do. I may be disagree with you here, but demonstrate to me how anything has significantly changed in the Middle East that would want or dissuade them in the West from doing something other than politics.
I say is definitely... My response into that would certainly be it is a political issue. And the problem is we're so concerned by security issues and all these different things that we're not paying attention anymore. And this is why I've recently written on my blog.
Matt, let me ask you directly. What happens in London, in England, in the British Parliament, when somebody comes out and says, the Palestinians are being murdered by the Israelis. We in England we in the United Kingdom must do something to persuade the Israeli government there is another method. What would happen to that person politically if he put the blame on the Israeli government? Because they do have the greater power.
Of course, and that
what would happen to that politician?
I would say he would probably not be taken too seriously, but they've been passing through symbolic acts, but I completely agree with you in that sense where we need more effective action. We need to be addressing the conflict with more seriousness because at the end of the day, this is where you're coming from. Israel is the strong partner and they have that responsibility to be addressing the issue because they're the strong man. The Palestinians have their own issues where they can't, you can't get a state on a silver platter.
Let me ask you, what do you think is Netanyahu's dream of Israel? If he could have anything he wanted for Israel in, say, 10 years from today, he can dream the Wizard of Oz. What would Dorothy dream? What would Benjamin Netanyahu want for Israel? Give me its borders, its demographics, its relationships, its power. Tell me what is, in your opinion, the current Prime Minister of Israel's dream for Israel in relation to the Palestinians and the world?
Netanyahu is a very interesting man. He's been dominating the headlines recently, and I would certainly say the laws being passed through are radical and not in keeping with, what people would expect Israel to be. And I think his view would be, we have this controversial Jewish state bill that's being, pondered throughout Parliament. That goes through. We're looking at we're looking at what is called an ethnic democracy. So it's a very hybrid democracy. It's not a real democracy. It's a democracy in name only. And slowly but surely, Netanyahu is tightening the occupation and everything, the worst aspects of it. And I believe, personally, that this is good for the conflict in a very backhanded compliment sort of way, where it's going to attract more attention to the regime's brutalities rather than having a left-wing government in power, because everyone will be like, yes, Netanyahu's gone, but then the left-wing government is almost exactly the same. We're just like, we're not going to deal with the Palestinian issue. So I'd say the longer Netanyahu stays in power, the more we can do to act on the injustices against the Palestinians.
Now, let me ask you this. Let's say, for example, in the Great Britain, you have this Jewish member of parliament who came out this week and was quite critical of Israel. Immediately, he was labeled as anti-Semitic, even though he's Jewish. I'm sure you read about it. How do people in England, how do people in the United Kingdom, you have a large Muslim population, you have I think the third largest Jewish population in Europe behind France and maybe I'm not sure if you're ahead of Russia or not. I'm not sure how many are left in Russia. But anyway, you're right in the top. How do people feel about this idea that members of parliament and lawmakers in Britain and members of the government who are Jewish tend to side with Israel even over what others may perceive to be British interest? Because in America, we had this question. It was a very serious question during the Iran vote, the Iran deal vote, when many Jews were accused of dual loyalty. I am a Jew who's never accused of dual loyalty. I'm an American veteran, and I say America first as a means to make Israel first. I don't think Israel can be strong without a strong America. So to choose my fingernail over my heart would be absolutely ridiculous. So in England, do politicians, are they accused of dual loyalty when they side with Israel over British interest? And I might say one more thing before you answer that in America, the overwhelming majority of Jews in our Congress voted for the Iran deal with President Obama and did not vote with Israel's prime minister on that issue. So how does it work out in Great Britain?
In Britain, there's still lots of big issues in relation to this issue. I mean, the government will condemn the violence, as it did in the brutal Gaza war that we saw last year, which killed over 2,000 Palestinians and left over 80 Israeli, I believe it was about 70 to 80 Israelis dead. The problem is we have lots of rhetoric, but in reality, the rhetoric is very much at odds with the institutional reality. I mean, last week there were lots of, we have the same issue in France. There's lots of attempts to boycott Israel and challenge the established status quo. But the governments, with their vested interests with Israel, weapons, arms deals, business ties, technology ties, basic economics, see Israel as a necessary partner in the Middle East, as opposed to all these the Arab regimes, which, as I was saying,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
As I was saying. I'd say the problem is lots of these governments, particularly in the West, including Great Britain's, the United Kingdom's, correct me, they see Israel as a strong regime in the Middle East, surrounded by all this chaos. I mean, Ehud Barak described Israel as, a manna in the jungle. The chaos of the Middle East is known very well to most people. It's almost illogical. But yes, as I answer your question, the problem is they see a strong Israel, but in reality, it's a short-term benefit. The problem is we keep relying on that short-term benefit, but what we see in Israeli society and politics is that it's becoming increasingly volatile, and that volatility is eventually going to blow up on itself. And what the West needs, I almost think, is a sustainable Israel, a strong Israel, no doubt, but one that isn't actually going to end up collapsing on itself because of all the issues, because it simply can't maintain an occupation as it currently stands. Because you're eventually, for those people who don't talk about, we have these people in the Jerusalem Post, for example, they'll call anyone who compares Israel to anything else false moral equivalence. They'll brand that any sort of comparison with apartheid South Africa, even Bosnia back in the 1990s, or even to the most extreme, but I won't say I compare Israel specifically to, the Germans during World War II, but there are many aspects of their behavior, particularly towards, how the Germans treated the Belgians, they treated the French, they treated the Poles, with a certain disregard for, proper human treatment. And the problem is, we have to realize those things ahead of, Israel's military, and all these other benefits the British government gets from it, because voices
I've lost the call.
We're going to have to just leave it for another
Oh,
time.
wait,
I'm
here
here,
you
guys.
go.
I'm here.
What do you drop?
Yeah, I think my signal dropped.
Okay. Okay, are you on the air now?
I'm on the. Doesn't
Make sure. Oh.
Yeah, I am now.
Okay, I wanted to say, in Israel, you have roughly 8 million people, 6 million Jews, and 2 million non-Jews. Now, Israel claims to have this great army that can go anywhere at any time and do anything it wants. But how many countries in the world have 25% of its population as a potential enemy? I mean, seriously, if you have 1 out of 4 people who might revolt in the incident that you would go abroad. For example, imagine Great Britain or the United States going to war and with a country and with Mexico, and 25% of our people are Mexicans and hate us, and we hate them, and we have brutalized them. How much loyalty could we possibly expect? Now, in America, that wouldn't be too much of an issue because they're geographically located in certain regions. But in Israel, you're talking about a very, very small piece of land. I mean, extraordinarily small piece of land. It's smaller than the state of Connecticut, which you can't even see on an American map, much less spell its name without putting outside of the country. So you're talking about a situation where the internals of Israel, the demographics, with the Haredi, the non-Haredi, the Arabs, the Ashkenazi, the Sephardim, you're so divided in that country, the African Jews, the Arab Jews, the European Jews. Now you have this little influx of some other types from Ethiopia, and they're discriminated against because they're black. You have such a divide in the population that Israel is, by its very demographic nature, built with blocks that are on sand that can fall apart at the first shake of a wave. And I don't understand this claim of great strength in that circumstance. Now, I'm going to play into Kervin a little bit here because Kervin's sense of humanity is far more than our kind of scholastic view sometimes. Oh, certainly I'll speak for myself, my own. I tend to shy away from feelings. I have a letter here from someone in Israel who wrote me, a friend. Her name is Anna. And she said, we are awaiting your show tomorrow. I'm not sure what kind of an expert this other guest is, but I'm anxious to hear him. Please do not put all Israelis together. People here are very different. You know what kind of cultural mixture we have here. People have come from different places, and they know different lives, have lived under different types of governments, have different educations, and they often don't even like comparing themselves to each other. The truth is not obvious, and the solution is not clear. We suffer many things here. We see many things from the outside, and we don't like them here. I don't want my children to become haters, to hate Arabs because they are Arabs, but to put the nation together and to make it a better nation. Tell me, how do we address the concerns of just a very good person like that living in Israel, like a white person might have been trapped in the apartheid of South Africa that nobody liked? How do we begin to address those kind of issues? Kervin, are you there?
I'm here.
What do you think about that?
You know, the funny thing is, from this side, from where we are in the UK, I was listening to what Matt was just saying earlier on, and it's funny from a different perspective because both myself and Matt come from different eras right here in the UK. You know, there's a big age difference between the two of us and how we were brought into the Middle East conflict. Where I grew up with the Palestinians being portrayed as terrorists, aggressors, people who had actually taken possession of a land that didn't belong to them, etc. And Israelis were always painted to be the recipients of this bad behavior. I also heard what you said earlier on about what would it be like for a British politician to speak out against Israel. And I look around the world and see what I see, and I think people are missing some of the biggest portions of truth that there is that irrespective of what these leaders can resolve and can't resolve, innocent people are dying. And you have a generation of individuals from Palestine now who have watched the generations before them restrained, arrested, detained for long periods against their will. There's lots of stuff that we're hearing coming out now, atrocities that they've been subjected to because of the authority and power that Israel has. And I kind of wonder as to why is it that every single country that's come out of Europe and everywhere else seems to have always sided with the way that Israel have portrayed the conflict to take place on that territory, which has always made the Palestinians out to be the bad guys. Now, I'm not claiming to pretend that I know all the reasons and I have all the answers. But what I'm still seeing, what I'm still witnessing, is almost as if you've got a gladiatorial bully. Because what the Israelis have, as far as their resources are concerned, with what the Palestinians are fighting back with, which 9 times out of 10 are sticks and stones, there's a ginormous difference to the way that either one responds to the other. And I'm just compelled to want to say something because I continue to see the loss of life of the innocents. For me, I cannot work out why there has not been more input in resolving this issue, because let's just get it right. If the United Nations they seem to be a toothless organization that are unable to go in and do anything unless they're invited to come in, well, then that appears to be powerless to me. I'm just not sure as to what we have as a unilateral, worldwide, resourceful tool to go into somewhere and say, you know what, this ain't right. How you are treating these people aren't right. We have an issue here right now where there's an 8-month baby that's just died in the West Bank because of the Israelis using tear gas. They fired tear gas into this place. I don't know if you guys are aware of this particular story.
I haven't heard of this one, but we've heard about all these horrible arson attacks, and I think what I find the most disappointing thing about how this conflict has been portrayed is this terrorism narrative, but it's also the disturbing way the Western governments keep overlooking
with her because I've got 4 children and nowhere to go.
Well, you need to come home.
You do not get it, do ya? Right? Do you think for 1 minute that I'm coming in the house with her there? No, you've not got to go, right? You've got to get out of the house, right? Because I've got 4 children. No, so I'm not coming in the house then until when Ashley gets there at like 12 o'clock tonight or whatever. So I've got to stay out of my house now for... No, I'm not coming in the house. You don't quite get it, do you? You don't quite get it.
Guys, can you hear me? Hello? Hello? Hello?
what kind of future both societies are preparing for themselves by. They need leaders. They need They need to get on the table and try to discuss things again, because it's not just we need international pressure. We absolutely need that. We need that external pressure, and this is what my tutor, Dr. Bregman, has taught me. We need external pressure, we need timing, and we need external pressure in Israel, followed by internal pressure by the Palestinians.
Yes, but Matt, no one is applying that pressure. The minute someone tries to even hint that, not that we would prevent, but that we would not even give a new item to Israel, there is an uproar of a cry of anti-Semitism, the only democracy in the world worth saving, that they're different, the Arabs are animals. It's just impossible. Right now, Obama has been pressed to give practically another $50 billion in weapons, armaments, trade, and economic incentives to Israel, knowing that these crimes are going on, because it would be the death knell if he didn't do it. These settlers, I'm ashamed to say, many are from the United States, from Brooklyn, like Rabbi Chachani and his family, and his son was just arrested for a murder. They run over innocent Palestinians. They shoot them on sight. They say a knife is on them, and they shoot them, and there's no consequence. They burn their houses. They dig up 1,000-year-old olive orchards and trees. There are no trials. There's no sense of justice. They are terrorists. And in this country, where the radical right-wing evangelicals, these are Pat Robertson and Mike Huckabee and Ted Cruz, they believe Israel must exist for Jesus Christ to come back. Well, I'm still waiting for the Messiah to come, but they're waiting for him to return. Now, they're waiting for him to return, and on this basis, they have to support Israel, in spite of the crimes that they see and they know. And the minute these settlers go about and burn down a Christian church, are right on the wall, no God but the God of Israel, Christians are pagans. They write this on all these Christian and mosque churches and Arab mosques. No one in America says a single word about it. Lately, they burned down a sacred church in the Sea of Galilee where Jesus supposedly made the miracle of fish and bread loaves to feed the crowd. It was burned to the ground with horrible graffiti written on it. Not a word in the American press. And as a tribute to Israel, Israel's press, like Haaretz and even sometimes the Post, they cover this, the Times of Israel. They demonstrate, J.J. Goldberg in the Atlantic Monthly, they condemn this. But the American media will not condemn this illegal settler activity. And I will ask you, what is going to happen when the Palestinians of the West Bank get fed up and go in and kill 1,000 or 2,000 settlers? What is going to happen when they go in and burn down a village of an entire settler group of 500 people and shoot them as they're running out of their houses? What is going to happen when the Palestinians do to the settlers exactly what the settlers and the IDF are doing to them? What will then happen? And I predict that is the explosion of which you now so aptly speak. Tell me what will happen then.
What will happen afterwards or before?
Then, after. Will there be a mass slaughter? Will there be a mass expulsion? Will Israel go on a war footing and kill 10,000, 100,000? What will happen then?
It's difficult to forecast the future, but I completely agree. I see parallels with what's happening. Like, obviously, we saw what happened in Bosnia. What's happening is the more that we have the settlement crisis, which is threatening to undo partition of the contested land and create a binational state. The two rival ethnic groups in a generation or two will live intermixed in the same territory in overlapping homogeneous enclaves. Basically an artificially created Bosnia, and in such a small, tight region of the world, in a region experiencing, the wider Middle East. Look at what's happening there. It's experienced severe ethnic, religious, sectarian, and political upheaval. This will spell future mass violence if you're comparing it to all the other conflicts in history, where things are being stoked, constant tension, constant violence, and eventually something will blow up. But my view is I see this as an advantage in itself, and this is like there are enormous gaps. This is one of the most, and sensitive conflicts in world history up until now. I mean, there's hatred on social media. There's hatred in Israel. Between Israelis hate each other. Palestinians hate each other in some cases because they, if they try to change what's happening. What I say is that we have to approach this in almost not just a moral argument. We have to look at it also as almost just, practical. We have to make all these, those who will listen, that Israel stands to gain little from its current predicament. What do you say to that?
But in trying to get Israel to feel that they'll get little from their predicament, what pressures are being put on Israel to get them to conform, or even pay attention and listen?
Well, what I say was, I believe in, there's lots of politics and geography and history to this conflict, but it's also a psychological one, and you have to change the psychological outlook of lots of these. We have so many young people coming into this conflict now who are probably going to have a lot different views to the conflict than the older.
Here's a difference with the young people that are coming into the conflict now. They're coming in with bitterness and resentment, having watched the generations of their fathers and forefathers, uncles and grandfathers murdered, killed, and bombed out. So their stance is different to one that was going to be negotiated maybe 20 or 30 years ago. The goalpost has been shifted because now these are angry, resentful, hateful people who are now very, very angry about how they feel their family has been treated without any support from outside countries who seem to be living off the wealth of Israel,
including Arabs who do nothing to help them.
Yes, I agree with that.
Let me address something else about the young issue, and this is something Israel will have to face. In the age group of 0 to 14 years, the Palestinians' population is 45%. The Israeli population is only 25%. That's a huge difference of the upcoming generation below the one that's currently coming on the scene at age 21. Also, the birth rate for the Palestinians is 4.5, and for Israel, just below 3. So demographically, there's already set in structure a huge advantage for the Palestinian demographic as opposed to the Israeli. And I think the bitterness is also compounded by the fact that the Israelis, who you say both sides have to change their hearts a little bit, the Israelis who visit America, and I have several what we call emissaries who come here from Afula in the north central part of Israel, they are absolutely determined to believe, for some reason, the failure of the Israeli education system, our nationalism, are just out and out what Moses calls stiff-neckedness among our people. And Moses said we have stiff necks. Well, they believe the Arabs are animals. They really believe this. They're Untermenschen. They call him Untermensch, what the Germans call subhuman. And let me finish by saying this. When we, in my community, my Jewish community in Connecticut, when we have tried to talk to them, these emissaries, and we've had many over the years come here, they all have the same view. We Jews in America know nothing. We don't live there. We can't possibly understand it, and we're supposed to give them their... But they will handle it.
Yeah.
On top of that, David, as Ninja has just said, America also has no right to say what is right while they oppress, imprison, and murder their own citizens.
Well, that's just ridiculous. I mean, we do not imprison people because they happen to be Palestinian or Arabic. But I'm not going to defend my country to Benjamin Netanyahu. He has lived here, and he lives off of our goodwill and our fortunes that we send there in huge amounts of billion-dollar packages and military care. And for him to do that is not only non-Jewish, it's non-human. It's called ingratitude. And if you want to read about ingratitude, you're in the right place, because William Shakespeare wrote about it more than anyone in the world, whether it be King Lear giving up the kingdom God gave him to 3 honorary daughters, or 2.5, or Hamlet, or Macbeth killing the king who honored him. Ingratitude permeates Shakespeare. So if you want to talk about a Shakespearean tragedy, let's talk about Benjamin and his Likud party's ingratitude to the only nation in the world that preserves the existence of Israel. Am I right or wrong, Matthew?
Absolutely. Just one additional point, and this one comes from one of our listeners. America has more hungry children than any other modern country, and many Republican congressmen who want to cut aid to the poor, seniors, and veterans. Yet U.S. gives billions to Israel. How can we do this, especially when Israel is killing Palestinians? For the fiscal year ending in September the 30th, 1997, the U.S. has given Israel 6.72 billion, right? And 6.194 billion falls under Israel's foreign allotment, and 526 million comes from agencies such as the Department of Commerce, the U.S. Information Agency, and the Pentagon. The 6.72 billion figure does not include loan guarantees and annual compound interest totaling 3.122 billion the U.S. pays on money borrowed to give to Israel. It does not include the cost to U.S. taxpayers of IRS tax exemptions that donors can claim when they donate money to Israeli charities. Wow. Now, that's a powerful statement right there, eh?
Well, I mean, I think we could come up with a date with a number far newer than 1997. But the issue here is that America does support Israel, and there's nothing wrong with supporting Israel, but we should require something in return. When I went to university, I had a social contract with my family. I would study and make good grades, and they would finance the bill. I couldn't go there and party away and do everything I wanted and waste the money and expect them to continue funding me. And in the same sense, diplomacy is largely soft and hard. When it's hard, it's military. When it's soft, it's finances and rewards. And our soft side has failed because we have given all the carrots, but never even thought of the idea of using a stick or expecting something in return. Is that right, Matthew?
I agree with you there, and this is where, when I've been writing recently on my articles on Israel, I tend to look at it, Israel responds with carrots and sticks. The problem is we have seen too many carrots recently, but the Israeli government has historically been dealt with in the peace process with the Arabs or the Palestinians under a carrot and stick diplomatic approach. So we had the 1979 Camp David summit by President Jimmy Carter, Sadat, Begin, right-wing ideological fanatics. Some people on the left would call him, other on the right would call him a hero. But, Egypt and Israel were at war for, 4 times, 1948, 1967, and between 1967 and 1970. And then finally the Yom Kippur War. 10,000 Israelis dead, 30,000 Egyptians dead. These are, these numbers dwarf the casualties in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in one sense. But they eventually, the American President Ford eventually said to the Israelis, if you're not going to agree to Sinai 1 and 2, not the eventual Camp David agreement, but Sinai 1 and 2, that you will withdraw from these territories, we are going to delay those military agreements agreed by President Nixon. So eventually they started to agree to it, even though it was very difficult throughout the process. But you didn't have a friendly peace at the end of it, but you had peace because there was pressure on both sides, as opposed to what you saw at Camp David in 2000, which I was a bit too young to understand back then. But it was effectively a diplomatic bribe where they said, okay, we'll give you lots of this security because that is what Israel wants. This is what we hear from all the other side. Oh, we can't live in peace, etc., etc. What we have to do in any sort of, human conflict in general is you always have to look at, what each side wants. And we know what each side wants. But the problem is one side does have to be brought to the table more. And
But Matthew, the issue here is Israel has a long-term strategy, and that strategy has become very evident to those of us who have watched it and care about it, I might say. And that is delay, procrastinate,
Precisely.
until the Palestinians, I don't call them Arabs, I think that's like calling Native Americans Indians. I mean, it's ridiculous. But they have this idea that if they procrastinate long enough, they will win. And let me give you an example. Let me give you a key example here that relates to Syria.
Before you bring through the series, when I say Arabs, I mean Arab regimes that they've been in war at.
Okay, fine.
I don't mean Arabs in an inflammatory way at all. It's just
no. I wasn't referring to. I'm referring to Israelis who insist on calling Palestinians Arabs because to call them Palestinians would imply that there was once a Palestine. And Israel would like to claim there was never a Palestine. There was an Israel. There was an Arab-dominated Israel. There was an Ottoman-dominated Israel, an Egyptian-dominated Israel, a British-dominated Israel, and now there is Israel. There was never Palestine. So they won't call them Palestinians for an obvious reason. So let me say this. In Syria, you have a situation where a large portion of Syria, since 1967, called the Golan Heights, has been occupied illegally. And in 1982, I think, annexed by the state of Israel. Not maybe it was annexed, but the year. So it was definitely annexed illegally, not recognized by any power on earth. Since that time, 1967, Israel has grown billions of agricultural value and exported to Europe that product for a political and a profitable economic gain. They have stolen water, not paid for that water, from Syria's Golan Heights. They drill wells for natural gas and oil in that territory.
Recently.
And that's recently. They use that land any and every way they want. It gives them a great and significant military advantage, being only at its distant border, 60 kilometers away from Damascus itself. It can divide the entire northern Israel that they've prevented. There is no desire whatsoever to resolve that crisis, as was Egypt resolved. And in fact, many argue that Israel has supported the Assad family because the Assad family swore never, ever to make peace with Israel at the cost of the Golan Heights or any portion thereof. So as long as Israel could delay, the Golan Heights de facto belongs to them, and all the resources, including nearly 40% of Israel's drinkable water, comes from there through its tributaries and two major rivers into the Sea of Galilee, which is the Kinneret Sea in Israel, and then later on through the tributaries throughout entire northern Israel. Now, why do you think Israel would ever want a peaceful Syria that would make an honorable peace with it in accordance with international law, as did Sadat's Egypt, knowing it would lose the entire northern agricultural base it has established in the Golan Heights? Tell me, is that not a situation where procrastination, duplicity, and lies do not serve Israel well?
I'd agree with you on that point now, because what we've seen in Syria, almost most Israelis nowadays will probably see the fact that they didn't relinquish the Golan Heights back in March 2000. Well, I mean, yes, March 2000 at the let me check. Yes, the 26th of March, when you saw the breakdown of the agreement between Hafez al-Assad, Clinton, and Ehud Barak. They'll see that as a blessing in disguise because of what's happening in Syria. I think what we saw there and now, the reason Israel's so keen to hold on to those territories, and I'm not saying it's right at all, what happened back in 1967 was a campaign of ethnic cleansing because they drove the Syrian people from their homes. They've destroyed lots of their infrastructure, and they in the Middle East started building settlements there. But what we have now is we missed an incredible Clinton missed an opportunity back in 2000 to come to an agreement on these matters. And since, they had this interesting thing here, which I'd like to read out. This is the most important text, apparently. as it is the last and most comprehensive Israeli offer which has ever been made to the Syrians today. This is what Barak says. If I may.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Mr. President, I invited you to this meeting because I believe we have reached a moment of truth in the effort to achieve a comprehensive peace between Israel and Syria. You know that I have been working on this since I first came into office 7 years ago. I am now in my last year of my presidency. I have lots of things I would like to finish in that time. One of them is a Syria-Israel peace, a peace of the brave that, when implemented, will end the Arab-Israeli conflict and provide a better future for Arabs and Israelis alike. A peace that will open the way to a new era in US-Syrian relations, from which both sides would gain a great deal. A peace that will help ensure a stable environment for Syria, one in which your proud legacy will be carried into future generations. PM Barak has exactly the same desire, but to do that, you both need to know whether your needs will be met. I have emphasized to Barak, and he has agreed, that the peace must be an honourable one, a peace that fully respects your dignity and secures the vital interests of Syria, just as it secures the vital interests of Israel. So what we had there was just a breakdown on both sides. Barak basically suddenly had a last-minute shift, and then we have the Syrians, where I agree with you. What's the difference here is we say that, Egypt were always a big problem. Egypt always had to go to there because Sadat was a unique individual, which he was. But the Syrians have a completely different mindset. They want to sit physically on the water. Assad does not recognize the borders established even by the European powers in 1916. So technically, the Syrians broke the international law, even if it was 10 meters. So they wanted a full Israeli withdrawal back in 2000, but then there was a drought, so the distance was even greater than everyone previously anticipated. So the Israelis were reactive and did not have a positive agenda anyway, but then you had the Syrians who are extremely stubborn, as we can currently see with Assad currently, bombing and refusing to buckle to Western demands. So I'd say with the Golan Heights, it's more a matter of both sides are unwilling to come to the table, as opposed to having where the Palestinians, it's more asymmetrical conflict where, there's a lot different context.
Matthew, you have to think this way: if you have a home, and somebody came into your home and occupied 2 rooms of your home, mm-hmm. and kept it and killed all your family in those rooms, took everything out of it, and then redecorated it, and then rented a whorehouse out of it, and then decided they might negotiate with you on how to return it to you, how would you feel about this?
Ooh, powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. It belonged to Syria. Israel took it illegally in a preemptive war. 1967 was a preemptive and planned war. They went there to take those Golan Heights. There was no serious threat against Israel. They started that war. Israel started the 1967 war. And we have to be reminded of that fact. That was not a war in which Israel was attacked. They started that war. They took that land. They intended to take Jerusalem. They intended to take the West Bank. That was a planned strategy. And they keep Assad in power today largely because of one reason. Assad will not come to terms on the Golan Heights, and that means they get to keep it de facto. Why else did Putin return from Washington, go to Moscow, and the next day Benjamin Netanyahu flew to Moscow, and the next day they both invaded Syria? Explain that to me. Am I dumb? Explain to me what's going on here. What does do you realize over 1.3 million people who are claim to be Jews in Israel are Russian? They are Russians. They came from the Soviet Union and Russia. They speak Russian. They read Russian. They like the Russian form of government. They are influenced by Russia. They like the big man idea of history. And 90% of them voted for Netanyahu, their modern Stalin Brezhnev. Think about it. There is not a small coincidence in the socio-cultural, traditional, religious bonding forces among these people.
Very true. But here's a $1 million question. You know, as people in general, even in a family environment, when someone's wrong, they're wrong. There's always consequences. We love them, but there's consequences for the action. Here's $1 million question. If it's clearly seen by anybody with an ounce of common sense just how wrong what Israel are doing, right? Why is it governments right across the world continue to support them?
Matthew, you've tried to answer that before. Try to be more direct with that. Don't give us all the problems in the Middle East. Tell us directly why
would they support someone knowing that what they're doing is wrong?
Why are we supporting them knowing what they're doing? Why is Angela Merkel supporting that regime? Why is she giving them 5 nuclear submarines? Why is France passing the law saying if you oppose BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel, you are committing a crime? France just passed a law that if you support BDS publicly, you are committing a crime. I think that's against the European Union laws, but freedom of speech. But France has passed a law, and no one says a thing. Who supported it? Jewish members of the French Parliament. There's a problem here that I can come out and say, kill all the Palestinians in Europe. Nobody says a word. But I come out and say, sanction Israel for this crime, and it's a crime in my own country. How is this possible, Matthew? You live in Europe. Explain that to me.
Explain why we continue to support them, even though they know it's completely wrong.
Yeah.
I would strategic strength, the illusion that there's strategic short-term strength to have from a military like the Israeli military. And it cannot be denied that the Israeli military are one of the most powerful on the planet. And I believe Western policymakers will see that predominantly as a priority over the stateless people, and that's how they will probably see it, as opposed to someone with morals. Politicians don't necessarily have to think. Allow me to finish, please. I would say politicians are also put in very difficult situations. Well, I'm not defending it. I'm just saying politicians can't always necessarily think in a moral sense when they have so many obligations to a state. It's a very but there has to be idealism along with realism attached. And I think what's lacking nowadays is that ability to see the long term. And I always get very frustrated when I do see in politics this always idea. And I think it's very much related to the wider war on terror. And that's why we're avoiding these questions now about Israel, is because they're an asset to the war on terror. They have great intelligence industry. They have like I say, a powerful military, and we can't risk getting, annoying Israel or upsetting their politicians for fear that we'll lose an asset in that region of the world, which provides us with so much strategic and military intelligence. But then again, this is the problem. Short-term, quick-fix military solutions will never produce sustainable peace. It's impossible. I mean, and that's the problem we see in our war against ISIS, the British war on ISIS, the American war against terror around the world. We've seen countless times in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, even if it's covert or obvious, that quick fix doesn't work. And the problem is we're stuck in this institutional loop almost, that the global war on terror as it is going to work. And it's very much used to the Palestinian conflict. We saw that with the Second Intifada between 2000 and 2005. It was a perfect opportunity for the Israelis to really kill the idea of a Palestinian state or coming to the table, because the United States just had 9/11 attack. You had George Bush and Ariel Sharon coming together. I mean, no chance. They're not peacemen.
Let me say this, jump in. I appreciate your answer. But first of all,
I'm just being realistic.
Okay. First of all, Israel, to my knowledge, has never sent one single soldier to fight alongside an American in Afghanistan, Iraq, South Vietnam, North Vietnam, Korea. Many Australians and Brits and others, Turks, died with American soldiers side by side. 37 nations fought: Poland, Germany, England. Many Brits died in Iraq and Afghanistan in behalf of America. As far as I know, no Israeli has ever done so. So that's number one. Number two, if they're a military strength, I don't trust Israeli intelligence at all. Israeli intelligence supplied false information and disinformation and outright lies to the neocons who persuaded the Bush-Cheney regime to
You're gonna laugh. I'm actually dropped out of the call.
Hello.
I'm back.
Hello.
Sorry, I lost signal. My internet went down this end, and there's nothing else going on. It's just that my signal just went.
Oh, no, it's absolutely fine. These things happen all the time, Kevin. Well, David, you were bringing up a really, really good point on the Israeli standpoint of they're very merged and fused with Western society. And what we saw precisely when we were talking about the illegal Iraq war was, in the 1990s, we had two major enemies of Israel, Iran and Iraq. Serious enemies, both of the United States and Israel. They would go for the strategy of dual containment, where a hardline stance by Israel towards the Arabs was adopted by many Americans, Jewish neoconservatives and non-Jews in the 1980s and 1990s. Cold War was coming to an end. What do you need as a new enemy? You need, communism is a very ideological thing, but now they have Islam as an ideological, clash of civilizations thing. So what we have here is, the fervent embracement of the worldwide view of the Israeli right and the far right, which depicted Islamic fundamentalism and terrorism as the main enemy of Israel and the West. And this, as you say, was an ideological basis for Middle Eastern policy, where Jewish and non-Jewish neoconservatives held important military and foreign military posts. And we saw, quite tragically and very momentous after 9/11, the convergence of the American right and the Israeli right around an anti-Soviet, anti-Islamic, anti-Palestinian, and anti-terrorist agenda. And now, obviously, the war on terror was so significant. The 9/11 was one of the most significant events in the 20th century, let alone, 21st century, my correction, 21st century, let alone world history. So, because their psychological and crude cultural stereotypes are now very much set into Western culture about the norms of Islamic fundamentalism, where if we see a suicide bomb go off. I would like to reiterate to anyone listening, I never would reiterate the use of suicide bombing to get your way. But when we see suicide bombing, we don't see it as a tactic anymore. We don't see it as, related to the actions of the other. We just see it as an outbreak of madness. We see it as something, ultra religious, as opposed to thinking, well, how do we address that? So yeah, I agree with you there. There's a big problem where, we need to change those. We really need to work at changing those perceptions, because at the end of the day, they aren't sustainable, and they're actually causing more damage and good to both the United States. And like I said, the reason probably why we have lots of Western powers going along with it is because, how would I say it? What the United States does, the rest of NATO would do on the, strategic side. If you get what I mean. I agree with you, David.
Listen, on another note, right? What you actually have, what you also have, right, is going back before media was as easily accessible as it is now. The Israelis were obviously very good at manipulating what came out and how it came out. Right now, with open news channels and all the other, internet media and everything else that's now available to us, they cannot manipulate that in the same way, and the truth has begun to come out. But
absolutely.
With this, you've got the residents of the countries that politicians who support the Israeli government do not support the government of their countries in that support. Right? But majority of Americans are not behind the American support of Israel. Majority of the people of England and the United Kingdom are not supporting their government support of Israel. And the same could be said for many countries. So how are the governments of those countries still being allowed to get away with supporting something that everybody can plainly see is wrong? That's the question that I'm really trying to get an answer to.
Well, I'd say they're not getting away with it anymore, Kerbin. We're talking about social media, free speech. We have so many articles being published nowadays, and people exchanging so many diverse views across the world that eventually they're not going to be able to ignore it. And I think, they're introducing these things to ban boycotts and ban, you can't boycott Israel, etc., etc. Personally, I believe that it should be phased. I've discussed this with David before, where I believe, firstly, we should boycott the settlements, and if they do not keep complying, because those settlements are effectively ethnic cleansing. We'll move away from that.
Wait a minute, Matt. What brought apartheid to its knees?
What brought apartheid to its knees? And I'll agree with your answer there. It was boycott eventually. But my point is, the reason that the governments aren't paying attention to it, but the problem is it is working because they're introducing, bans on boycott in the United Kingdom and France. Now, why will people suddenly say, well, that will encourage people, because most people don't like being told they're wrong in these cases, when we know in most cases that this is an occupation. We have so many facts to back it up that we should just keep going on those tracks. And I think it's a good thing they're banning it, because people will ask, why are they banning it? And the more people protest outside the country and are being put in jail, it will seem a bit ridiculous that they're throwing people outside the country in jail on Israel's terms. I mean, if you think of these massive protests occurring across the world, Norway, Sweden, Britain, France, they can't throw everyone in jail for discussing boycott. What do you think, David?
Do you guys hear me clearly?
Absolutely.
Echo. Okay. Matthew, I think you should hang up, and Kervin will ring you right back, because you're making a huge echo.
Okay.
Just hang up, and Kervin will ring you right back.
Okay. Let's do this again. We're coming back live again. We're going to call him back in. We're obviously having a technical difficulty. Okay, who we got now?
Well, I was asking David's opinion on how banning boycott may attract more people to it, because we're attracting people's attention to our cause. And
I'm here.
Yep.
Okay. Matthew, I don't know if there's something wrong with your ears. Is he echoing to you, Kervin?
No, I'm getting no echo back here, David.
Okay, well then it must be across the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah,
then.
I've got echo from you as well, David. Echo.
Okay, I will speak more slowly.
That's fine.
All right.
That's better.
I want to address something that weighs heavily on my heart.
Yeah.
Beyond the Israeli High Court authorizing the destruction of Palestinian homes when a Palestinian throws a rock or causes harm, but does not require the same of Israelis. I remember before 2014 when Netanyahu knew what had happened to those 3 boys who were killed by Palestinians and carried on as if he didn't know to justify that war. At the same time, some children of a rabbi and his friends went about and killed an 18-month-old and then at the same time killed a 16-year-old boy by burning him to death.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Now, as a Jew, there are 2 things we don't like to hear. The first is that somebody was gassed to death. That's just atrocious. And the second is someone was burned to death in an oppressed situation. So those things weigh heavily on my heart. But the fact that Israeli law permits the destruction and the death of, in many instances, of people and their property, where in Israel proper, for a Jew, that could never, ever be permitted by law, seems to me a standard that is so diverse in the equal application and due process of law that it deviates so far from British common law, Napoleonic law, Justinian law, Roman law, Persian law, and ultimately the law of the Torah, the Bible by which every Jew is required individually and personally to live, that it is an abomination of humanity itself. Now, when you add that to the idea that Netanyahu is so intent on dehumanizing the Palestinian people that he would actually go so far as to accuse falsely a Palestinian of instigating the 6 million deaths of the Holocaust brought about by Germany and the Nazis, who were Germans, even admitted to by Angela Merkel when she said, we don't need an Israeli prime minister to tell us we're not responsible for the Holocaust because we Germans are. And had I been a German, I would have sent a bill to Israel and say, send me back that reparation and all those payments we send you for the Holocaust and send it to Palestine. So when you add together this personal revenge on Palestinians that the Supreme Court of Israel has allowed, and you add it to the prime minister saying that the Palestinians are responsible for the greatest crime known to Jews in any time in history, practically, since the fall in 70 of the Second Temple and the diaspora, it seems to me that there is more than education, which you recommended, required to change the status quo, which is going to lead to the ultimate destruction of those people. You tell me what you think of that.
I would agree on you and all these things. And this, David, is precisely what we need. We need everyone to be spreading. If the government isn't going to publicize this stuff, and mainstream media isn't going to publish this stuff, we need to record these atrocities. And there are lots of people working at it, which I'm very proud of. But I will get to your question. Okay. I completely agree with you on the stone throwing thing. I mean, we look at what's happened to the Israeli government, and this is what people have to see, is that what we're having now is that several members of Jewish Home, right-wing supporters, are taking prominent positions, including Naftali Bennett being appointed Minister of Education and ethno-nationalist Ayelet Shaked as Minister of Justice, the one who passed the Stone Laws. Bennett has stated clearly, continuing construction in Jerusalem and the West Bank will remain a priority, that he will do everything in his power to make sure the Palestinians never get a state. And then also, Shaked has been mired in controversy following a 631 excerpt called calling for Palestinians and Palestinian mothers to be killed, and that's basically a call to genocide in itself. So what's funny is such a statement would have terminated the career of most politicians in the West. However, Shaked's popularity was elevated, and then she passed that law that imposes a 20-year prison sentence on convicted of throwing stones at moving vehicles, labelled as an act of terror. She said this specifically. Tolerance towards terrorists ends today. A stone thrower is a terrorist, and only a fitting punishment can serve as a deterrent and just punishment. Now, given the Knesset's questionable record of prosecuting settlers for the similar acts against Israeli soldiers and Palestinians, the widening of what constitutes a terrorist to absurd parameters, and the length of the prison sentence, I think this is perfect. That it illustrates and encompasses the intensification of the occupation under Netanyahu's government and the increasing power of pro-settler movements and ideological hardliners in Israel. For that, I'm with you, and I think this serves as, it's perfect. I mean, it's the perfect way of saying to people, how can you accuse someone of throwing being a terrorist for throwing a stone? I mean, the question people should ask, whoever's listening here who may disagree with my views, why are they throwing those stones? Like, hello?
Yeah, we can hear you. You've gone into an echo.
Oh, good. Oh, yeah, Wednesday echo. But yeah, they should be asking why they're throwing that stone. That's what annoys me. You have to go back into the history books and look that the Palestinians have been throwing stones since 1967, since earliest days, since the first Intifada, that they were doing it. And they've expanded it now to suppress Palestinian resistance. But eventually, it's just... But the funny thing is, it's going to make things worse. They're going to keep protesting. I completely agree with you on that terrorist thing. It's ridiculous, and it serves as ammunition for us to use against Netanyahu's government and present just why everything is so wrong about the Israeli occupation, how it's tightening, how it's getting worse, and how we must now act to solve it. And speaking on the second issue of the Holocaust, so I don't go off the topic, I was extremely disturbed by what I saw last week when Netanyahu actually did say those words. It was a cheap shot, and dangerous. I mean, politicians using such inflammatory rhetoric in times of immense upheaval, extreme brutal violence. We're seeing people stabbing each other on the streets, like as Kermit will agree with me, inhumane actions and chaos on the streets. To say such a thing in that current climate in itself is stupid and wrong, and it spits in the face of everyone who died in the Holocaust.
Matthew, let me share with our audience, if you will, the words of J.J. Goldberg, who is really a brilliant man, and he writes for the Atlantic Monthly. He holds Netanyahu to account, but sometimes I agree with him and sometimes I don't. But he gave a fairly good answer, I think. He said, Netanyahu's version of history is so demonstrably and utterly at odds with the historical record that it is hard to imagine what could have driven him to offer it in a heavily watched keynote address to an international convention. He prides himself on his grasp of history and makes frequent use of it and the Holocaust for object lessons. Even his harshest critics will have difficulty absorbing the knowledge that he can be so ignorant of the basic facts of history. There's no lack of observers who disagree, often sharply, with his policies. But this goes to his competence. And then he adds something really important. What could have caused him to do it? And here's what he says. The larger question raised by Netanyahu's words are that they go to the rapidly escalating level of vitriol that the prime minister is directing at Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas. It is his attempt to, and these are my words, to delegitimize the Palestinian leadership and to justify whatever comes in the future. Because if you can justify hanging Adolf Eichmann, then you can justify ethnically cleansing his children, which are Palestinians, according to Netanyahu, from the sacred homeland of Israel. That is his real racist intent in that statement, and have no doubt about it.
I would agree with you there on that topic, and I think that's what worries me. It's the future. It is absolutely the future. Now, we may have covered this earlier, but I think we need to keep emphasizing that Israel is heading for a very, very dark place in the fact that they're increasingly using past tragedies to justify keeping their security, but we've heard that across history in monstrosities, ethnic cleansing campaigns, and I won't say that anything that happens in the future will be a genocide or anything like that, but you've heard similar rhetoric before where you scapegoat, and I reiterate, I'm not comparing any listeners again, I'm not comparing anything because there's lots of context to this conflict, but let me get to my point. You cannot scapegoat an entire people for an atrocity, and you cannot I was talking about this with Kervin earlier. You can't scapegoat an entire people for causing an immense tragedy of the Jewish people. That's dangerous in itself because it gives, as David said, legitimization for atrocity. And as Kervin said, they're already being whitewashed as terrorists. Every single Palestinian, to many far-right wing Israeli politicians, and I'm not saying Israelis in particular, but settlers included, and radicals, they just brand them as terrorists, and that gives them the legitimacy to kill them. That's where we see those extrajudicial killings in the streets, and just saying, "Oh yeah, he's a terrorist. I had to kill him." It's legitimization, and that for me is very disturbing, and I think it's a dark future.
And Matthew, how is it possible that as a Jew, I mean, I am a Jew, I believe that humans are in God's image made. Now, I know it's not popular to be very religious nowadays, but I was brought up with the idea that we are in God's image made, and what we do to each other, we do to God. Now, I'm sure other religions feel the same about that, but when you have these settlers teaching their 3- and 4-year-old children to kill Palestinians, to put up targets of Palestinians. They're like American children for many decades who were brought up killing Indians. The only good Indian was a dead Indian. And this has transferred, and Israel is becoming a Wild West, Dodge City, cowboys and Indians, the Sioux River, General Custer, that they're doing it with rapid-fire machine guns, deadly cluster bombs, phosphorus gas, F-16s, and even the nuclear weapon that they claim to have. All these things escalate and elevate their attack upon an ethnic group among them to a level that is inhumane, not only physically, but spiritually. It is draining the soul of the normal Israeli. And I predict, and I'm not sure about this, but knowing other Jews, I predict that it's going to become so racist-based by these non-Ashkenazi Jews, the Sephardim Jews of Yemen and Morocco and Egypt and Iraq and Persia, and the Russian Jews of communist Russia under the Bolsheviks. These Jews have come together and formed a new majority in Israel that is driving Likud. And these people are going to make Israel a country so intolerable, the Jews are going to pick up and leave exactly as they left South Africa and wound up in my community here, in America, in Britain, in Australia, and New Zealand. You go to Canada, you go to all the English-speaking countries of the world, and you will meet in the Jewish communities South African Jews who left because they couldn't tolerate the apartheid any longer in South Africa, and they didn't want to be isolated from the world. And as the sanctions, and they will come, on Israel take place, no Olympics, 340 professors in Great Britain just signed an agreement that they would no longer participate by visiting or having visitors from Israel. These things will, in Canada, you had Harper, who formed this great iron wall against this BDS movement. Trudeau is not going to be the iron wall that Stephen Harper was. And people in Canada, they proposed a law that if you say anything against Israel, it becomes illegal. To the credit of Canadian Jews, they opposed it. To the credit of Canadian Jews. But the Stephen Harper evangelicals and American evangelicals want to propose these things. And as Israel's soul sinks into the desert, I predict, and this sounds religious, God will desert those non-religious Jews, and the secular Jews will be left there like a Masada. And what happened at Masada? while Israel praises Masada today as a great act of heroism, actually the people in Masada were thieves who had killed 700 Jews in Engedi before they went up on that mountain and killed themselves in violation of the Jewish law before the Roman army. So I don't see them as heroes any more than I see current-day IDF members as heroes, nor that government that pays for them to do the crimes they do. These people will collapse in and upon themselves, and the good Jews will create another diaspora, and the dream would have failed unless we, who can speak, unless we do speak. And when Prime Minister, the last thing I will say, when Prime Minister Netanyahu stood before the United Nations last month for 44 seconds in silence with a menacing, a terribly menacing face and a scowl, and said that we were silent, he was exactly guilty. We are silent because we do not speak loudly enough for the Palestinians that man is killing every single minute.
Hey, that's very true, but you know the one thing that I was thinking as you was talking there, David?
No.
Let me just share it with you very quickly. One of the greatest atrocities that the world had ever saw was what Hitler and the Germans did to the Jews, right?
Holocaust.
The Holocaust, right?
The Shoah. We call it Shoah.
Now, peace reigns with Germany and Israel and with the rest of the world who have forgiven Germany for their past crimes against humanity. So what could the Palestinian people could have possibly done that was anywhere near enough to justify this relentless hate campaign that persists between these two peoples?
I'm going to let Matthew answer that, but I'm going to jump in and say a direct. One of my followers in Britain is named Adnan, and he wrote me on Twitter that the real fury in Israel against the Palestinians is that they won't surrender. Think about that.
Yeah, I agree with you there. There was this saying to one of the Shin Bet officials when I was watching this amazing documentary called The Gatekeepers. Really, really amazing. He says, what the Palestinians say is, for you to suffer, that's enough for us. Victory for us is to see you suffer. And the Israeli Shin Bet guy, head of the Shin Bet, said, we win every battle, but we lose the war. And obviously that's going to get more and more frustrating over time. But the problem is, the Israelis aren't thinking, why aren't we winning every battle? Why are we losing this war? It's because they're not changing their approach. They're not willing to change the status quo. And as the strong man in this argument, to sort out the conflict and end the occupation, which I believe they can still do, but they're running out of time based on demographics.
Mm-hmm.
They don't actually see themselves as doing any wrong, though, those in power in Israel, right?
Yeah, well, some of them probably do, but they're doing it for politics. We look at politics, and, what Netanyahu did was a very, 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 dangerous aside, we'll just say it was a very cheap political shot. And he's utilizing terrorism narratives, as he always does, to appear as Israel's strongman, because Israeli society has always placed in politics an emphasis on security, and politicians will keep playing to that recipe if it works. And by stoking ethnic and religious division, Netanyahu can say, well, look, I've stopped the Intifada, or I've cracked down on the Palestinians. That's it. The reason they stick to this narrative is because it works. It's human psychology, and that's the problem. We have to change that psychology, and we have to keep going, because as you say, those academics signed a petition. It's working. It's baby steps. It's like anything. We can't expect in anything a quantum leap. I never agree with that. It's baby steps at a time, one little step at a time, until we reach that end goal. And I believe, like any conflict, it will come to an end at some point. It'll be a comma in world history if we look at it when it comes to an end finally. It's just a matter of gradually getting there, because this is something it's like a war of attrition, and obviously both sides are fighting very well at it. But we need to. The most important thing we can do as bystanders. Well, we're not bystanders. How I say the best thing we can influence this outcome is, and I always believe it with the war and terror, any sort of conflict, is by changing those narratives to the one that we know is true and just. And we have to keep emphasizing that this occupation is not good for Israel, first and foremost, and we also need to keep emphasizing that same thing, the human rights violations, those atrocities, the arson attacks against innocent families, the burning down of Christian churches, the torture and detention of thousands of Palestinians. Those things need to keep being heard, and they have been heard for decades. But what we need to bring into this narrative and to hear from those who will listen to us on the other side is how Israel will not benefit in the long term with the current path they're on. And we're hearing it. That's the amazing thing. I've read so many articles.
And in the meantime, who holds them accountable for their atrocities?
Absolutely. And that is going to keep going one step at a time. But it's just going to take time, because some of these people, as David has always told me online when we've had our conversations, some of these people are literally, you can't talk to them. But you have to. I always agree that there are always people who will be willing to listen on each side of the conflict if you just try and get to the heart of what they want and try and hear what they're trying to say to a point.
Let me address the issue of responsibility. When the Palestinian Authority wanted to join the International Court of Criminal Appeals at The Hague, International Court at The Hague, Israel lobbied against it and had America promise to cut off all funding to Palestine if they joined an International Court of Justice. How is this even feasible? How is it possible that if you say, I want to press my rights in an international court, I'm going to cut off your money? How is this possible? That's like in the American South. A black man could never testify in court. He was not worthy to take an oath, and therefore he couldn't testify. And therefore, whatever you did to a black man, there was no punishment because the man wasn't qualified to testify in court, and he could not get justice. And this is what Israel is doing to Palestine to a large extent. Now, how can you hold people responsible? But now they are a part of that court, and they will be heard. And I think the day of Israel demonizing every single report that comes out against its policies, like the South African report with the ambassador, what was his name? What was his name, Matthew?
Goldberg.
The guy who did the report, Goldberg report. That man was so demonized he could not even come to Israel to see his own grandson become a bar mitzvah. Max Blumenthal. Max Blumenthal is on Twitter. He is one of the key advocates for Jews rising above the fray of the cesspool that a lot of Israelis are falling into under bad leadership.
I agree with that.
Why was Sidney Blumenthal, Max's father, ripped over the coal and mentioned 88 times in the Republican Congress's investigation of inquiry to Hillary Clinton during the Benghazi hearing last week? 88 times neo-fascist Tea Party Republicans asked Hillary about Sidney Blumenthal. Why? Because they want to demonize the father of Max Blumenthal to get to Hillary to make her unelectable by Jews in America. They went so far as AIPAC asked Sidney Blumenthal to disown his own son, Max. They called Bill Clinton and asked him to disown Sidney Blumenthal. This is how far this regime will go to protect its interest. Now, I want to address one more thing because we have about a quarter of an hour left. What is going to happen between Israel and Syria, Israel in Syria, and Russia? I want to know the effect that Russia is going to play in the Middle East now that it has not only its political, but its military footprint firmly planted.
Just before you answer that, Did Obama not say that American troops are going on the ground?
Yes. Special forces on the ground. I was shocked by the information, but at the same time,
We are losing you, or are you losing me? Somebody talk to me. Oh, for goodness sake, I keep losing my signal. Has it gone again?
hello.
Yep, I'm back. We're back.
Yeah, we lost a bit of connection there. Yeah, there's a lot of echo, but I guess in my response to the Syrian Israeli. Oh,
We need to call David into this call. He's on it.
oh,
Yes.
oh yeah. Okay. We can just wait till then. That's good. Really enjoyed this. It's been good fun.
It has. I'm not sure how we're going to get David in here. We need to get David in here. Let me drop the call, or you drop the call, and I'll call it back.
Okay.
Yeah, just end the call, and I'll call it back.
Yo.
Okay, we got you.
David? Yeah, I'm back.
Okay.
Oh, he's back.
Okay.
It happens every time you mention the name Putin.
Yeah, I think they're onto us. Sputnik.
Yeah. That's okay. Go ahead, guys.
My response to your Syria question and the Israeli thing is, as long as the Syrian civil war continues, the Golan Heights will remain, which is quite an interesting question because everyone is actually speaking about, and you asked that really, really interesting question. Okay, say we get at the end of the occupation, well, what are we going to do about the Golan Heights? Isn't that considered to be part of the occupation? That needs to come into the dilemma as well. But I'm afraid to say, as long as the Syrian civil war continues, the Israeli government will no way receive those, give back those territories to the Syrians, most of the Israeli public will agree with them on that point because there's just too much of a threat from that region of the world at the moment. And unfortunately, you have ISIS, you have al-Nusra, you do have al-Qaeda affiliates there. I mean, I don't think anything's going to change anytime soon until the Syrian civil war ends on that one, unfortunately, David.
Well, I agree, but it's I've read a strategic report from the Israeli defense industry, and their argument is we will never, ever return the Golan Heights. Never. We will do everything in our power, but it's going to be a de facto acquisition like America acquired Florida or California or the Gadsden Purchase. They might give some financial compensation after the fact, like America gave Mexico $53 million after we took the South New Mexico and Arizona, Southern California. But they're never, ever. You can just figure it out. The Golan Heights will be Israel, Eretz Israel, which you call it Greater Israel, in the future. And it's never, ever, ever going to be returned. That's it. Forget it. Now, but my question is, what does Putin want to gain in Syria? What is he doing in Syria? And is Israel working with him or not?
I don't have enough information to answer the Russia-Israeli dynamic. However, I would say, what would Putin want to gain from it? Well, I've heard a lot of hustling and, bullish talk in the Western media, BBC in particular, about Russia's intentions in Syria. And I always am very skeptical about them, based on the fact, one, Russia have been allies with Syria since the 1960s. They have more right than America to be in that region of the world and interfering in Syrian affairs because they have so much military interest there. I don't say it's right, but I'm just arguing on a very practical basis that the Russians do have more rights to be there. And then you hear people condemning those bombings. You're like, just like Russia's killed 600 civilians since it started its bombing campaign. Well, the day after people criticized Russia's bombings, the American drone killed 10 people in bombed a hospital in Afghanistan. Glenn Greenwald called it out and was like, wow, that is quite hypocritical. So Russia's interests are to keep Assad in power. And I deplore and condemn everything that Assad has done to civilians. I have spoken out a huge amount against, the barrel bombings, and he has, to some extent, helped create ISIS by alienating the Sunni population and releasing jihadists from jail in the wake of the the uprisings in 2011, because he knew it would delegitimize the opposition. Now, following on from that, the war against Islamic State is the priority, and at the end of the day, people will say, "Oh, Assad did this, Assad did that." Well, I always ask them, "Okay, get rid of him. What are you going to do afterwards?" You always have to think of what are you going to do after that, because they didn't have the answer to that in Iraq in 2003, and they're going to have the same outcome if they deposed of Assad by covert means or obvious means. But you're just going to have a fragmented opposition in power, or the alternative is a brutal Islamic State. But I'm not going to. I reiterate here, so-called Islamic State, because it does not represent Muslims across the world in any way. It's just a hybrid, and it's politics. But if you have those alternatives, they are not good alternatives. I'd much rather. I'm not saying it in a good way, but at the end of the day, there's no one else to replace Assad. So I'm afraid he's going to have to stay, because regime change has always shown that it never works, especially in the Middle East, where they detest Western policies most of the time. We saw that in Iraq.
I think Iraq, March 19, 2003, I don't want to attribute all the blame, but we talk about the Arab Spring. We talk about the Balfour Declaration. We talk about the breakup of the Ottoman Empire at Versailles, right after Versailles.
All very significant.
Yeah, all these things are the drawing Lord Curzon and Churchill getting out there their crayons and pencil and drawing a new Middle East. They did the same thing at Potsdam and punished Poland when Poland was the first to fight. These politicians get together, whether it's Churchill, Balfour, Weizmann, Netanyahu, Clinton, or God forbid George W. Bush, and they think they have the answers. Their arrogance, their supreme arrogance and access to weaponry and the mendacity of people who won't speak against them allow a transfiguration of life itself that leads to a imbroglio of hell that's unresolvable. And I wonder sometimes, as in a marriage, is sometimes the best way a divorce. If you cannot get along, and you're never going to get along, just divorce.
Yeah.
Or if you have an employee, and that employee begged you for that job, and all he does is complain and fail to produce and cost you money and clients, fire him. You're doing him a favor. And if at some point the problem is unresolvable, and there's one object that's always standing there for some reason, even if that object is named Israel, it's time to say either straighten up or you're going to be thrown off this ship, because we are moving forward. And the only way you can do that is to make it clear to the voters of Israel. And if they choose to go that route, then let them go that route and let them face the consequences. But we cannot say to them, with all the strength of Western knowledge and experience, Germany, France, England, Russia, China, Japan, America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, we all say to you, Netanyahu, go in this direction. And you alone with North Korea and your occupied whatever in the Golan settler height or West Bank settlers agree on a different policy, then you face those consequences, and that's the end of it. We're done with you. It's a divorce. You're fired. Have a good life. And until the Israeli people understand this, there will be no solution to the problem.
I agree. There has to be a change in approach to that status quo, David, and a change in how we address issues in the wider region, and that includes the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. What my view is, though, you can't just simply say, well, it depends. Any divorce is a matter of perspective. It could be a blessing in disguise. It could be a A non-violent divorce could be a violent divorce, an unpleasant divorce, or a welcome one. So, and it's like firing an employee. If I was to construct a state in the Middle East, just as I did in Iraq, and suddenly say, oh, no, that's not my responsibility, I'm going to detach, then I could leave that, let's call that state, those people, fired employees. I'm leaving them in a rut. They need some sort of prospect, or I need to answer to those claims. And obviously, we're still waiting for those answers on Iraq. But all I'm saying is, it's just we need to change the nature of our approach to current politics, because we're just in a loop. That loop it greatly troubles me, because it's just we're not addressing the key issues of how to solve the conflict in the Middle East.
You know what I call it? For me, a divorce is an opportunity to meet new people and start a new life over one that didn't work. Not that I've ever been divorced.
Well, I haven't been married, so I can't really say.
Well, I'm not going to give marriage advice, but I do think Iraq is a different issue, because we are not responsible for Israel. Israel has created itself with our financial assistance, and they don't want our philosophical, cultural, or moral views. They directly tell us we don't know what we're talking about. But Iraq, the United States of America, is solely responsible for Iraq, because we, including Hillary Clinton, allowed George W. Bush to commit what I consider an international war crime in invading that country, with only Britain and Spain at his side.
Just before we finish, because we've only got a couple of minutes left.
Yeah.
Only this week, Tony Blair has come out and said that their intelligence, their information was wrong on Iraq. Right?
About time.
Well, it's been. He's just come out and told us what we've always known, and what was always believed, and what they've always denied. Now, bearing in mind that Tony Blair can now come out and say, after all of these years, that what they went to war for was a lie. Does it justify what they were able to accomplish in the means of that? Because they're still trying to say that, well, Saddam was a tyrant and we had to get rid of him anyway.
No.
And how does that help us to understand how politicians operate, think, and what they act on with what we see going on around us, even right now in the Middle East? Very quickly before we finish.
Well, with regards to Iraq, does it improve anything to say Saddam was a tyrant and stuff like that? I argued in my dissertation that even if we hadn't invaded Iraq, there would be civil war there, because the Arab revolutions occurring there would have affected Iraq as well. But I just don't think it changes anything, because the way they approached it, the way they amalgamated the two worst experiences of colonialism, both in France and in Iraq under the British Mandate, has created so many problems. That's what they basically did again, and they've caused so many problems out of it. To say Saddam was a tyrant, yes, that is undeniable, but he kept a lid on things. It's just a view that Western democracy, Western culture, Western the way of life is the way forward. But Middle East is completely different. I've said to David, if I came up to David or came up to anyone who had completely different mindset in life or culture or experiences to me and hit them and say, you're going to live like me, they're not going to react well to you. It's just basic human instinct that if someone's going to hit you or oppress you, you're going to resist them. And that's what we saw in Iraq. It's just a complete misapplication of Western values, power, and what we can actually do the best we've got. And with regards to, I'd like to finish up on the Israel thing just with one statement. One is afflicted by illness, another is bleeding violently, and that's the Palestinians. And this is our duty to care for both and understand the needs of both if this is to ever work. We need a sustainable peace to not exaltation. This bloodshed must cease, lest future generations be defined not by an inherent faithfulness in human institutions and attainable peace, but more hatred, more division, and more cruelty inflicted and self-inflicted cruelty. That is all war promises, and we must make Israel, first and foremost, recognize that they must change, lest, as David says, that divorce comes in.
Thank you very much. We are going to have to cut it short. We're just about to hand over to another presenter. All I can say once again, Matthew, it's been great having you on Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio. Apologise for all the technical difficulties, distractions and interruptions.
Thank you for inviting me.
I could imagine that we're going to be having another follow-up to this show, because I just believe that we've only just hit the tip of the iceberg. Last word from you, David, before we go.
Matthew, thank you so much for coming. Kervin, thank you so much for facilitating this. And I'd like to end with the idea from John Stuart Mill, a great British philosopher, who said, I don't always agree with him, but in axiology, that is science of ethics, that what's good for the most is good. And if what's good for the whole world is for Israel to bend a little bit, Israel should consider not being so arrogant and possibly bending a little bit. Even the Torah, the Jewish Bible commentary Talmud, says that we should go with the majority. And finally, let me end on Iraq by saying, when Henry Kissinger was asked, why did America invade Iraq? Kissinger said, because George Bush didn't think Afghanistan was big enough a response for the World Trade Center collapse. In other words, it was all political. And today, my friends, we are paying the price for that political act.
Thank you very much, David. Listen, I look forward to having you back on again next week, David. Matthew, once again, thank you very much. We've got to move on.
No problem.
We've got another presenter coming all the way from New York, Sean, on World Jam Global Radio. Keep it global. We'd like to thank each and every single